All three scientists mention a cooperative or adaptable disposition, and on one or more lists appears sound health, beauty, rugged physique, expressiveness, vigor, longevity, and reduced need for sleep. Mueller in particular included some traits that quite certainly have little or no genetic basis. He mentioned moral courage, integrity, progressive spirit, eagerness to serve mankind, compassion, and appreciation of nature and art. In his future society, such traits presumably would be left not to eugenics but to euthenics, the movement to improve the human species by the control of environmental factors. Euthenicists shape people by shaping environment. Their number would presumably include the operant conditioners and the imprinters. For the present, the biological technologists offer us four principal ways to work toward engineering in a superior species of man. Enriching the human seed, regulating who can produce babies, making biological alterations, reshaping family composition. A fifth approach, that of duplicating humans of a desired model, is still some years off. We will get to it after considering the others. Enriching human seed. In their scenario for our future, starting to say a few years from now, the positive eugenicists expect to convert sperm banks into seed markets. These will handle not just frozen sperm of known quality, but also frozen female eggs and frozen embryos. The larger markets would have their own laboratories for uniting selected sperms and eggs and for cultivating the resultant embryos for a few days before freezing. Such prepackaged embryos of ready-to-go humans could be defrosted before being implanted in women. Current pattern of a flat price per ejaculate would disappear as emphasis shifted to quality. There would still be the same staple items of semen provided by nearby money-hungry college students, but the stress would be on suppliers of seed and embryos who have, as Mueller puts it, outstanding gifts of mind, merits of disposition, and character or physical fitness. If you're going to use donor seed to have a baby, they reason, why not get the best? Semens and eggs of healthy men and women with a guaranteed IQ of 130 or more could certainly command a $100 premium over the base price. Athletic stars with magnificent physiques and famous movie stars with glorious physiques often supplement their incomes by endorsing products. Would some of them be willing to endorse themselves in sensing by selling a product created by themselves, their semen or eggs? It could be very attractive financially, especially for those incomes had started declining as they usually do for such people. Men, for example, could easily add up to $50,000 annually to their income. If notable individuals were reluctant to be identified by name, they could still command an attractive premium for their seed. Their seed packager could identify the person as a former Academy Award winner or Nobel Prize winner, or the winner of 4 national golf tournaments, or a self-made millionaire, or a man who had been out to outer space. And what about the price for a frozen embryo that combined the seed of a certified genius and well-known actor or actress? In general, a female egg would cost substantially more than a thimbleful of male sperm. Eggs are harder to obtain, and even with chemically induced superior ovulation of a woman would be hard put to supply the market with more than about 130 eggs a year. Speaking of mice and men, the most dramatic possibility of seed enrichment was discovered by Beatrice Mintz of the Institute for Cancer Research in Philadelphia. She wasn't and isn't interested in human seed enrichment, but she perfected a research technique with mice that permits multiple parenthood. Wow, again. Her strategy in studying how organisms develop through cell division was to produce markers that could be traced. She mated 2 purebred black mice. Simultaneously, she mated 2 purebred white albino mice. When the fertilized eggs of each mating had grown to the 8 cell stage, They were placed side by side in a culture dish. The outer covering of each embryos was dissolved so that cells from the two embryos could be intermingled. She put together an 8-cell embryo composed of cells from both sets of parents. In short, 4 parents. This new embryo proceeded to grow. It was implanted in a prepared female mouse and grew it to birth. The offspring showed dark and light markings not only in the coat but in the eyes, even in the eyes. She told me that she had put together more than 1,000 handmade mice born of more than 2 parents. Could human individuals with multiple parentage be created? She said she was quite sure they could be. Robert Sinsheimer agrees that it probably could be done. He has speculated on what characteristics would emerge, especially the psychological and behavioral ones. His conclusion: no one knows. He imagines that human result would be exotic. Direct genetic engineering with humans is not likely to be a possibility that can fascinate or worry us before, say, 1984. But before the year 2000, it will probably be possible to modify physical traits and bodily processes if only 1, 2, or 3 genes are in control. With fruit flies, it became possible several years ago to create by gene manipulation changes in color of the eyes, the structure of the body, number of bristles, and the like. Genetic diseases caused by the failure of a single gene to order up a critical enzyme will be coming under control. Apparently, in some of these diseases, such as certain liver disorder, the cause is not a missing gene, but rather a failure of the gene in question to be switched on. Although every cell in the body has the same set of genes, most of them get switched off as they move into specialized areas like the eyeballs, the toes, and the liver. Some get switched off by mistake. Scientists at the University of Cologne, Harvard, and Cambridge have learned the mechanism of this switching on and off process. They are starting to learn how to influence it. The ultimate height of the growing bodies of boys and girls is starting to be manipulated by hormones. Mothers who feel that their daughters will be social misfits if they are too tall, or sons misfits if they are too short, are consulting pediatric endocrinologists. Heavy doses of estrogen taken daily for a couple of years, starting at age 10, can cut 2 or 3 inches off the projected adult height of a daughter. Growth hormones have been used with some success to add an inch or two to short boys. Some scientists now believe that in the future, far more effective promotion of growth may lie in the component of growth hormones called somatomedin. Some youngsters can grow to the full root without difficulty. Others, especially in girls, have been afflicted with such side effects as chronic nausea, hypertension, and darkened nipples. Speaking of nipples, there has been some talk of the wisdom of de-breasting women as a part of overhauling people. I heard the idea first advanced by a medical philosopher at a conference on medical ethics near New York City. The idea was cited by H. Tristram Engelhardt, Jr. of the University of Texas Medical Branch, Galveston. It turned out that he had discussed the matter of 2 publications that the New Orleans medical researcher had presented a paper referring to the idea at Cambridge University Symposium. Engelhardt pointed out that millions of newborn girls in the Western world are condemned to suffering or death because of breast cancer. Enormous sums of money are being spent on research and treatment of the disease. The whole problem could be eliminated simply by nipping off a bit of breast tissue at birth. Such an operation would be about as complicated as circumcision. But what would breastlessness do to a woman's sense of identity? As for the use of breasts to attract men, padded bras and synthetic breasts held in a place that bisection could perhaps be a substitute until the world got used to breastlessness. Perhaps a substantial response would be a hesitant yes, but only on the condition that everybody else be breastless too. Human improvement is an attractive goal. When it is thought through, the volunteer programs aimed at specific objectives such as better mental or physical health or becoming better parents, we can all applaud. What about movement to realize some preconceived ideal human? That understandably can, at first glance, fascinate us, particularly those scientists who believe they have the insights and technology to help bring it about. In savoring the possible gains, we must also start looking at some probable social costs. For example, many of the proposals impinge upon freedom of choice. Glass gas cannot the substitution of a greater freedom of choice in new respects compensate for the restriction of some time-honored privileges? Any trade-off of freedoms we now have for the freedoms in new respects should, I suggest, be viewed warily. The whole notion of ideal human prototype to strive toward is worrisome. The notion would push us towards standardizing humans. We should cherish our present diversity, I believe. It makes life interesting for us. It stimulates our creativity. A higher level of intelligence is one of generally agreed upon ideals to strive for. Yet even here, social questions arise. Government figures indicate that only 20% of the available jobs in this country really require a college education. Yet a sizable majority of American parents already want their children to go to college. Overeducation has become a national problem. Can we become too bright as a society for society's well-being? Another point, if we raise intelligence levels without increasing training in altruism and social responsibility, we can end up as a society of sharpies. The use of donor seed to create ideal children raises several social questions. The purchase of the ideal seed of notables is not only a bit fatuous, but belittling. It puts a dollar value on human life, even assuming that prospective parents buy certified Class A seed. Problems will arise in parenthood. Raising children who obviously are genetically like you not only can be gratifying, but is actually easier than raising genetically strange children. That at least has been the experience of parents who adopt. Charles Freed, a professor of law at Harvard and an investigator of bioethics, states, the child from random egg and random sperm grows up in a family situation which is in some sense wholly the result of chance, and this may be a disturbing and unsettling fact. Finally, there is the hazard of outright state control of the ideal characteristics we should possess, as in the lock-unlock situation. Harriet Pipple, an authority on the legal aspects of the new reproductive technologies, told me that she is appalled by the idea of seed banks collecting human seed with desirable characteristics. It could provide the state with the technology for imposing its own standards. The geneticist James Nagel, who, as previously cited, foresees fantastic ways emerging for improving the human species, is uneasy about how some of these ways will be applied. He says the possibility that the application of these technologies will come about under the direction of an elite, dogmatic leadership creates the greatest social anxiety about them. We could end up, he suggests, under the dictatorship of hereditary endowment manipulators. And now we turn to the fifth way in which the biological technologists may be able to engineer superior people. Chapter 19, Duplicating Humans of a Desired Model. Man is indeed on the brink of major evolutionary perturbation, vegetative propagation. Joshua Lederberg, biologist. To biologists, vegetative propagation is the phase sometimes used for any kind of non-sexual reproduction. In short, it is virgin birth, or to be scientific, it is parthenogenesis, from the Greek parthenos, meaning virgin, and genesis, which of course means origin. But how can it be? The wisdom of history and long before the ark is that it takes two, a male and a female, to procreate. The birds do it, the bees do it, the fish do it, the bunnies do it, we do it, even the buttercups do it. Each does it on his own fashion, but does it. Almost all visible life forms begin with the commingling of two different seeding materials. While this was indeed true before the new biological micro-manipulators got into the picture, but it now appears possible, in principle, to produce a dozen or 1,000 identical twins of a valued racehorse, or a prize athlete, or a noted genius, or a vain dictator. Or you could have an identical twin made of yourself in a way that would involve no mingling of seed. Since word got out about this possibility a few years ago, there has been jocular speculation of mass producing Albert Einstein's, Arthur Rubinstein's, Mao Zedong's, Margot Fontaine's, Mickey Mantle's, Woody Allen's, Lillian Hellman, Shahs of Iran, or Queens of England. The process for duplicating or mass producing copies of an individual is best known today as cloning. In 1932, Aldous Huxley in his fantasy Brave New World dreamed up the name volcanovskification for some such process. His scientist of 6 centuries from now could be, by some wizardry, grow 96 human beings where only one had grown before. Titillating or not, the possibility of genetically replicating individuals without sexual congress is taken seriously today by many prominent scientists besides Lederberg. Among them are James Watson, Robert Sinzheimer, Robert Edwards, and Jean Rostand. The Southern California Law Review has taken cloning seriously enough to publish a 104-page assessment of the legal problems that would arise from the technology of cloning. The main argument is over whether parthenogenesis of humans can be done, but when and how best to do it. A few contend that it may never become feasible and that therefore it is preposterous to get worked up about the subject now. I have before me 13 estimates by well-known biologists. One, Mark Lepay, calls it a distant possibility. Scientists at the Rand Corporation arbitrarily estimate that human cloning will be widespread by the year 2005, or 28 years from now. All the others give a closer date. Some say within 15 or 20 years. A few say it will be possible within 10 years. Embryologist Leon Cass, who is no enthusiast of human cloning, is in the last group, he reasons. Given the rate at which the other technical obstacles have fallen, and given the increasing number of competent people entering the field of experimental embryology, it is reasonable to expect the birth of the first cloned mammal sometime in the next few years. This will almost certainly be followed by a rush to develop cloning for other animals, especially livestock. With the human embryo culture and implantation technologies being perfected in parallel, the step to the first clonal man might require only a few additional years. A lot may depend on whether one or another nation decides to make a major effort to achieve the cloning of either livestock or humans. Certainty, unless human cloning is banned, it is likely to become a reality within the lifetime of a great majority of people now alive. Since it will indeed represent a majority evolutionary perturbation, as Lederberg put it, I feel it deserves our thoughtful, if brief, inspection. It could become a momentous venture in attempts to manipulate man. The theoretical attractions of being able to create one or more identical twins of an individual human at will by non-sexual or asexual reproduction are several. Such a capability offers the chance to preserve and expand more precisely than sexual reproduction can the special talents of individuals insofar as those talents have a genetic basis. Sinsheimer has stated, cloning would permit the preservation and perpetuation of the finest genotypes that arise in our species, just as the invention of writing has enabled us to preserve the fruits of their life's work. And Lederberg argues that if you have a superior individual in its genetic blueprint in every cell, why not copy it directly rather than suffer all the risk, including those of sex determination, involved in the disruptions of recombination? In the traditional mating of humans, who of course are not yet near to being purebreds, you inevitably get a good deal of random assortment of genetic materials. Thus, asexual reproduction of a human musical genius would probably offer a better chance of ending up with one or more musical geniuses than leaving the matter to romance. This assumes that the asexual process works well Sports farms of professional athlete organizations might well be attracted to the idea of making direct multiple copies of their 6'10" basketball stars. Since they are already pay these stars more than 200,000 a year, building copies might seem like an attractive investment. Coaches have pretty precise ideas about the physical configuration of good football or soccer players. The professional ball team wouldn't want to produce for farms a dozen copies of Pelé or O.J. Simpson. Some marriageable girls might feel honored to offer their wombs for the nurture of these prospective superstars. In any case, surrogate mothers could be hired. Similarly, military leaders with billions of dollars available for research might well be interested in mass producing humans high in endurance, strength, or proneness to obedience. Dictators might justifiably see universal cloning as a way to achieve a more efficient, predictable, regulatable populace. Here are some other theoretical attractions. If you had 100 clones or 1,000 clones in a community, there would be one clear medical advantage. The organs could be freely transplanted among fellow clones without the still very bothersome problem of graft rejection. If a husband and wife were in deep distress because a greatly beloved child was dying, they could arrange to create another child that would be genetically identical. A woman who wanted a baby but had not come across a satisfactory mate could have, by virgin birth, a baby or of her own flesh. The baby, though younger, would be the mother's identical twin. People interested in personal immortality could assure themselves of at least a start. They could arrange through cell banking to have persons of their exact genotype live on, not for eternity perhaps, but for at least a couple of hundred years. Still, other arguments are offered. Asexual reproduction would permit sex determination because same sex would be assumed, and it would offer still another way to bypass infertility in either sex. Animal breeders are showing a lively interest in cloning. Those already involved in breeding purebred strains probably would not achieve much improvement in such characteristics as milk production, but they could, however, assuredly determine sex. A countryside full of identical cattle, however, might be more vulnerable to a new virus. So you shouldn't have too many twins. Breeders of purebred racehorses and dogs have rules requiring old-fashioned one-to-one mating. The rules probably would have to be bent before they could turn to cloning. If and when cloning does become a reality, James Watson foresees that there will be a frenetic rush to do experimental work with human eggs, he adds. The growing up to adulthood of these first clonal humans could be a very startling event. How long would it be before we could see movie production empires ordering up hundreds of facsimiles of sex goddesses of Raquel Welch type? There would be problems right from the start. Who would decide that what individuals were to be mass produced by cloning? Would it be left to a free enterprise market mechanism, or would the state take over? If so, there would be probably be black marketing. There would be a nervous world set up the International Commission for Genetic Control to license colonists that has been proposed by the English geneticist Lord Rothschild. And again, what would we do with the mishaps, the monstrosities bound to result at least in the early days? What if only 90% of the genes get switched on? Remember, Gurdon with his frogs averaged one success out of 70 tries. He, of course, was still learning. Lederberg is afraid that social policy on cloning would not be set after the principles had been thoroughly debated, but rather by the accident of the first advertised examples. Therefore, he is anxious to hold off on humans until fetal monitoring is substantially more advanced than it is today. A new set of human ethics would seem to be required. These new ethics would permit scientists to experiment with latent humans throughout gestation and would permit destruction of the fetus until at least 24 hours after birth. Otherwise, we would be confronted with an unacceptably high proportion of defective humans. Leon Cass quite flatly puts the situation this way. There is no ethical way for us to get to know whether or not human cloning is feasible. Are we ready for the new ethics? If cloning were accomplished, the predicted initial frenetic rush might occur, but I suspect that public interest would end as abruptly as the public interest in moonwalking did once the initial curiosity was satisfied. Cloning would be reserved for special situations, special needs. Within 2 decades, there would be disappointment that adults clones were not as precise copies of their donor parent as had been projected, even though they were genetically identical. These big successes in duplication would come when only identical physical configuration was sought, as in football stars and buxom movie queens. Disappointment would be more likely when duplications were made of people with special talents, high intellects, or outstanding personalities. Environment, starting right in the mother's womb, would still play a major role in development. A child's environment, including vivid life experiences, certainly has at least as much to do with aspiration, character formation, and disposition as heredity. And it has a good deal to do with intellectual development. In discussing the idea of mass producing an Einstein, the science writer Horace Judson noted humorously, Einsteins, the mathematical geniuses and violinists we know are of the offspring of Jewish mothers, and you can't get them from a jar. Cloning presumably would be done primarily with very successful people. What about the tendency of sons born in the shadow of very successful men to try to carve out lives of their own in some quite different field? All the clones of batch would be, of course, of the same sex. An occasional narcissist might wish to grow an exact copy of himself, but the vast majority of married couples would be repelled by the idea of having a baby that would copy of only one of them. Not only do most couples like the idea of contraception by sexual union, but they want the ensuing child to be the personification of their love. If cloning became general, it would represent one more assault on the already badly undermined role of parenthood. Many men would feel castrated. Many women would feel that they had been reduced to incubators. And under cloning, what would happen to child rearing? One of the most fascinating aspects of child rearing is to watch resemblances, talents, and personalities emerge. Under cloning, there would inevitably be a drop in interest in what would emerge. More would be foreknown, especially about physical appearance, and what would be the identity problems of a child who was not only an identical twin, which is hard enough, but an identical twin of a parent. Cass suggests that the result could be psychologically disastrous. As a major method of reproducing, cloning would be a disaster too. It would be a form of inbreeding that would head humanity toward a dead end. There would be a sharp decline in genetic variety. Diversity, it is widely believed, promotes human progress. Cloning of animals, particularly livestock, may on balance be a worthwhile idea deserving thorough investigation. But for humans, cloning would be on balance unjustifiable. The hazards, the ethics, the meager chances for any significant gain for mankind should impel us to reject it as anything but a challenging stunt. All research concerning it should, in each country, come under the control of the National Commission on Reproductive Research proposed earlier. I do not believe that these commissions should ban laboratory research on the kinds of cell manipulation that could lead to non-sexual reproduction. Cell fusion, for example, can be an important research tool in understanding the genetic basis of such diseases as cancer. The ban should begin, however, on research with embryos after the time they are ready for transplant in the womb. I believe that the ban should last indefinitely. At the same time, I recognize that enormous pressure might build up from the scientific world to attempt cloning. Scientific curiosity is a powerful and ordinarily a highly commendable force for progress. And discussion of the scientist's ambition would be reported by media and would excite public curiosity. If such pressure does develop, and then the ban should continue, at least until a number of primates have been cloned successfully. By successfully, I mean with a normal mortality rate and abnormality rate not significantly higher than that prevailing in sexual reproduction. This measure would put off any decision on human cloning for at least a dozen of years, probably more. And if a decision is then made to attempt to clone humans, it should be done only as an experiment. It should be totally controlled by the national commissions, just as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration controlled manned landings on the moon. For the cloning experiment, medical ethics and the law would need to be specifically amended in order to permit disposal of serious defective clones that were not detected until after birth. After a dozen successes in a row had been achieved, the goal might be set to try for 6 sets of clones. Each set might have 6 individuals. Once these 6 sets had been created, observed, and tested, the project should be closed down, just as the Apollo program was closed down after 6 manned landings on the moon. In the years since the final landing, public interest in sending off other moonwalkers has declined sharply, and I suspect that public interest in the building additional colonial colonies would decline just as sharply. In general, cloning is an evolutionary perturbation that humanity doesn't need and shouldn't want. How the clones turn out as they grow up might be watched for a while with as much curiosity as the early years of the Dione quintuplets were watched. But the successful rearing of these quintuplets did not set off any broad surge to find ways to have more quintuplets. After the official close down, there would be no more cloning unless on appeal the commission made an exception for some extraordinary reason.